we've had a lot of people ask how, where did we come up with this idea for the MZ75? Um, it's kind of a long story. It all started back in, when the railroad shut down in 1986 and I started on my own. And the only hammer I had at the time was a 25-pound little giant. Well, as work progressed and we got busier, I needed a bigger hammer. And I was looking for a hammer that worked like the Morgan steam hammer we had when I worked at the car shops in the blacksmith shop there. It's a 1,500-pound steam hammer that had been converted to air sometime after World War II. And I got to work underneath that hammer and run that hammer. And I was looking for a hammer that could be like that. Well, along about 1999 or 2000, I ended up buying this 150-pound Fairbanks hammer and installed that, and I did a bunch of modifications to that. But it still wasn't, doing what I was looking for. I mean, it's a great hammer, but I was still looking for that steam hammer type of a hammer. So I got the itch to build an air hammer. So I taught myself 3D modeling on the computer and designed a C-frame hammer with a laminated anvil, really simple pneumatics on it. When you step on the treadle, it goes down, and when you took your foot off, it went up. And it seemed to work pretty good. But I got the itch to build a bigger hammer. I wanted to build something in the 100-pound range. So I started drawing the design. I just kind of upscaled it and to make a 100-pound hammer. I started doing a little research. The Kenyon design was pretty popular then, and Chris Coleman had come out with his modification to the design. And then I had talked to a friend of mine down in South Carolina who had been building some hammers, and he said he had a system that I could use. So I ended up buying a cylinder from him for, at the time, was a rather large sum of money, I thought. And I put that cylinder in my frame. And when it came time to purchase his control system, it was a little bit more than I could afford at the time. So it's like, well, I've got to do something. So another friend of mine stopped one day and he said, well, why don't you make it like a steam hammer? I started doing some research on steam hammers because I ran that one for a long time, but I really didn't understand how they worked. So I started doing some research, started buying some hydraulic valves and pneumatic valves and taking them apart. I knew I had to come up with basically a slide valve, but I needed something that I could get off the shelf that I could convert. And after getting up in the middle of the night at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and coming out in the shop here and messing around, about 4.5 years later, one evening I came out and turned the air on the hammer, and the ram went up, and it started working. I was like, wow, this thing is really hitting. I was coming right off the compressor, so I'm running at 150 psi. So it was hitting pretty hard and pretty fast. And then it was just a matter of refining the linkage and, figuring out, just exactly how that linkage worked. And I got that one working pretty good. Then I decided to try the sword style system on this hammer. And I made a linkage that way with the wiper. And I got that to work because there was fewer parts with that, a little less complicated, but it really didn't fit the C-frame style hammer. And I didn't think I'd live long enough to figure them both out, so I decided to go with the original design and work on that. Well, I got to the hammer to the point where, it was working really well, and it's like, geez, I wonder if I could start selling these. So we actually did sell some KZ100s in the beginning, and then we started to sell a kit, the linkage kit and everything you needed if you wanted to build your own hammer. And with everything that we sell at Ken's Custom Iron, we offer a money-back guarantee. If you're not happy with something that you buy from us, you get it back to us and we'll get your money back. Well, it just so happens that we sold the kit to an older gentleman in Wisconsin, that he put it on an existing hammer that he had. And after about 6 months, it just wasn't running right. So we had been talking back and forth and tried to help him with it. So one one day Mary Lou and I jumped in the truck and we drove to Wisconsin, and we thought we'd give Clyde let's see if we could help Clyde out with that. Well, it turns out that, I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working right. It was hitting erratic, and it's like I wasn't happy with it either. So we worked out a deal. I ended up giving Clyde his money back, and I ended up bringing that hammer home because I wanted to find out why it didn't work. I knew I had to make that hammer as close to my KZ100 as I could as far as the linkage, the way the linkage was set up and everything. So I had to move the linkage to the left side of the hammer so I could shorten up the hoses. And I had to change the treadle because he still had the original treadle on the hammer. And I did those two things, and I turned the air on, and I was like, wow, this is a sweet little hammer. It's running really well. And then Mary Lou said, well, maybe we should start making them like this based on this design, so we could make a much more affordable hammer. A lot of guys are doing it as a hobby, and they want a smaller hammer, something a little bit lighter that they can use in their garage. So that's how we got started with the MZ75. And Mary Lou wanted a hammer named after her, so she said, if you've got a hammer named after you, I want one named after me. So that's why it's the MZ75. But if you look at the label, there's a little L in there because Mary Lou does not like being called Mary. So she likes to be called Mary Lou, so we had to put the little L in the label. And that's the story of how that got named. This is the first air hammer that I built. This is the one I taught myself how to 3D model on the computer. The air system is pretty simple. It's got a dryer with a regulator and an oiler. The control valve, you step on the treadle, it goes down. You take your foot off the treadle, it goes up. It works pretty good, but it's not as controllable as the steam hammer linkage. This is my prototype of the KZ100. This is one of the first linkages that I built. It's got a bunch of holes in it. It's got the same concept. This was an upgraded version of that. And this is the hammer that pretty much started it all right here. And that brings us to our MZ75 Power Hammer. This happens to be number 100. This is the 100th power hammer that we've made since we've started doing the MZ75. We put a little emblem up here to kind of mark that for us. We've made improvements since we built the first one. Some for production purposes, some for functional purposes, but we still use an American-made cast iron valve body with a hardened spool. The head is connected by our mechanical linkage. So we're using steam hammer type linkage, and what that means to the operator is because the head is connected by this mechanical linkage, I can step on the treadle and I can stop this head wherever I want to stop it. So if you're putting a tool underneath here, you can set your head down on top of your tool and then give it a light tap, or you can give it a hard tap just by stepping on the treadle. So it's like step on the treadle. For hard blows, everything is controlled with the treadle. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this video and commemorating our number 100 MZ75 Power Hammer. I'd like to give a big shout out to all the customers who've purchased a power hammer from us over the years. And I'd like to thank all of our customers that have purchased things from us through our website that makes this endeavor even possible. So thank you, everybody. If you have any questions concerning any of our products or our MZ75 Power Hammer, contact us at kensiron.com. Thank you.
This is one power.